Good afternoon, Ms. Proctor.
Good afternoon.
Just 1 second before. We have to leave by 4 o'clock so that they can get set up for the council meeting. I just want to remind you all that.
We can turn to paragraph 293 of the foundation document. This paragraph describes emails that were exchanged on August 2nd. So while you were away on vacation, you're not copied on them. I just want to ask if you were aware that this was being done. So on the morning of August 2nd, Mr. McNulty sends Mr. Seymour 2 documents entitled Centennial Pool Enclosure Design Components and Central Park Arena Design Components. Later in the morning, Mr. McNulty circulates drafts of those documents to the EMC and Mr. Seymour, looking for comments. You can scroll down. Paragraph 294. You see that there's an email from Megan Schollenberger, Acting Coordinator Clerk Services, to Mr. Houghton advising that Tom and Dave from Sprung are here for your meeting. And then paragraph 295 on the screen is an email from EMC member Larry Irwin to Dave McNeil with a copy to Mr. Houghton, Mr. McNulty, and Ms. Leonard. Mr. Irwin is sending 2 documents. They are a document pertaining to the arena and a document pertaining to the pool. So my first question for you is, were you aware that design components were being assembled to be shared with Sprung at this time?
No, I was not.
I'm going to ask you a question about the design features for the arena, and they're at TOC 195146. And if you can scroll down to the bullet point list of design components towards the bottom of the stage, I'll give you a second to read them, but I'll just let you know what my 2 questions about this document are. One, do you know if this kind of detailed information was provided to WGD to assist in its work on the estimates it was putting together? And in particular, if you look at the last 3 bullet points that are showing on the screen right now, do you know if WGD was ever asked to price out a second floor mezzanine and elevator to get to that second floor mezzanine and other things associated with it?
From my recollection, we were not at the detailed design components. We were costing out different construction types based on square footage. These components are all part of a detailed design phase, and so therefore I would have never provided this detail to WGD.
Okay, and with respect to the specific question about the second floor, do you know if WGD was asked to price out a second floor within the building that they were looking at?
I cannot recall that they were.
If we could pull up TOC 548961. These are the minutes of a department head meeting that took place on August 7th, 2012. If you scroll down to see the list of members, you were in attendance at this meeting. If we could go to page 2 of this document, see the 3rd bullet point under staff reports and other businesses, Centennial Pool / Central Park. The minutes describe that the chair, and Mr. Houghton was chairing this meeting, showed a cutaway of one of the hoop type supports in brackets column/beam provided by Sprung. The chair noted that in order to compare competing quotes and technologies, the amenities, square footage, and physical layout needed to be included. He provides some information about the structure to cover the pool and the ice pads. Do you remember from reviewing these minutes attending this meeting?
Yes, I do.
What do you remember about being shown the cutaway of one of the hoop-type supports that's described here?
This is what I mentioned previously, that I recall this information being shared as a promo of this product and how great it is.
What was your reaction to being shown this model at this meeting?
It's interesting, but it's still not the full scope of, it's talking about a specific component of that building, not its application. It's not a fulsome analysis of its performance in what we were looking for. So I just took it as information.
If you look where we left off in this paragraph, so just beyond halfway, it says sprung buildings can attain equivalent to LEED's Silver Standard certification, but will not be certified as the process and attributed costs cannot be justified. Do you remember any discussion about whether the town would be pursuing either a LEED Silver certification or building a structure that could attain LEED Silver certification for either the pool or the arena?
I believe in our Central Park steering committee discussions, we discussed the possibility of doing a LEED certification or shadow, but we were not at that point, in my opinion, of sourcing a design. So I recall hearing this, but it was just for information purposes, in my opinion.
What do you remember understanding about sprung buildings being able to attain equivalent to LEED Silver Standard certification? Do you remember being provided any information beyond what's reflected in these minutes?
No, and nor did I inquire about any further information on that.
Finally, the last sentence you can see on the bottom of the page there, it says MARTA will join the executive management team at their Wednesday meeting to be brought up to date on developments with respect to both Central Park and Centennial Pool. Do you recall attending that meeting?
I recall attending a meeting.
Do you remember what took place and what was discussed?
Without seeing any documents, which I haven't seen for that, I recall being brought up to speed, but I can't remember exactly what was discussed.
So these are minutes from an August 7th meeting. I now want to turn to an August 9th email exchange with WGD. It's in summary document 2.4, paragraph 29. This paragraph describes that at just before 1 p.m. on August 9th, 2012, Mr. Gregerson from WGD emailed you, quote, to recap our conversation, and he wrote a number of points. The one that I'm interested in is point number 3 there, green/efficiency initiatives. Do you remember having a conversation with WGD around this time about green/efficiency initiatives for the arena that it was working on estimates for?
I vaguely recall this. I believe it related to a grant submission and us requiring that level of detailed information to be incorporated into the grant.
Under the heading for the new arena, you can see there's 2 points there. You've got costing for the relocation of ball diamonds and remove all references to sprung anywhere on the drawings. Do you remember why you provided the instruction to remove references to sprung from the drawings?
I can't recall specifically, but likely because somebody asked me to.
If we could go to paragraph 31 in summary document 2-4. This email describes an August 15th, or this paragraph, sorry, describes an August 15th email that you sent to Mr. Gregerson and Mr. Dabris at WGD, along with Mr. McNulty. And you write to them saying that you spoke with Mr. McNulty and understand the information we expected today may be delayed. You advise them that we are on a very critical timeline and we need to compile an internal report in at least draft format by the end of the day Monday, with final information completed by the end of the day Wednesday. What do you recall about the timeline that you felt you were on at this point in time?
When I read this recently, I was trying to recall whether it related to a grant deadline or the report deadline, and it was not clear to me.
The grant that you're talking about, is that the CIIF grant to assist with funding for the refurbishment of the Eddie Bush Memorial Arena?
That is correct.
Mr. Gregerson's response is set out at paragraph 32 of this summary document. He writes back saying, not sure if you received the drawings. We are presently doing the costing. And you respond, yes, I got the drawings last week, but I understand the costing is delayed. Can you please confirm how quickly we can get the rest of the information? I've outlined our time requirements below. And he responds that costing would be finished by Monday, August 20th, with a report issued the following day. And he notes that operational costs may be delayed by a few days. Can you provide any more, or does this help you at all in recalling what was being discussed?
Once again, without going back to see when the CIF grant was due, I would assume this would have been for the August 27th report, but I'm not 100% sure.
Having looked at the email itself, which I'm happy to show you, the subject line is the Eddie Bush Arena. So does that provide you with any additional, that help jog your memory at all?
It could have been either report. It could have been the grant or the report.
Sorry, please go ahead.
Unless you know when the grant was due, and I can't recall that.
Is it the case that WGD is working for you on two rather urgent items at the same time in August of 2012 then? The work that it's being done on the potential new arena and the work that's being done to apply for a grant to refurbish the Eddie Bush Arena?
I believe yes, and they did overlap because the information was also being used in the report.
We could turn to paragraph 36 of summary document 2-4. This paragraph reports that on August 16th, 2012, WGD sends yourself and Mr. McNulty several documents, including a Central Park New Arena Options Report. And if you scroll down to paragraph 37, we don't have the attachment to that email, but we do have a document titled Central Park New Arena Options with metadata that indicates that it was dated on August 16th. I'm going to ask that we take a look at it. It's at TOC 9284. And if we could just scroll down a couple of pages to the section titled Pre-Engineered Structure versus Membrane Envelope Energy Usage. I'll have to keep going. So here's some information that WGD provides to you on August 16th about a comparison between a pre-engineered structure and a membrane envelope with respect to energy usage. They report normal insulation values for pre-engineered sandwich panel structures R19 for roofs and R12 for walls. Membrane structures by their nature have no inherent thermal resistant R value. And then goes on to provide some opinions about how that would play out with respect to energy usage. If we turn to paragraph 39 of summary document 2-4, this describes that the next day in the morning at 9 o'clock, Mr. McNulty sends WGD a sprung slideshow presentation about its performance arenas. And in the covering email, Mr. McNulty writes that he's attached a brochure on insulated fabric membrane arenas. In terms of thermal performance, their claim is R30. The aluminum extrusions are placed in a range of 10 to 12 feet apart, and between each is outside membrane, 9-inch insulation, inside membrane. There's no thermal break in the aluminum extrusions, but they are spaced quite far apart. And he goes on to write, remember, you are not to contact the manufacturer in conjunction with this project at this time. Do you recall receiving an initial report from WGD and then providing them with additional information about Sprung to assist in their work?
I recall Dave McNulty sending this email.
At this point, did you have any discussions with anyone about whether it made sense to permit WGD to speak directly to Sprung about their structures or fabric membrane structures more generally?
I recall asking several times why the restriction here.
And I just want to make sure that I understand your answer clearly. I know that you remember raising that several times. Do you specifically recall raising that question when WGD sends over a report that says fabric, membrane doesn't have any inherent insulation value? This is a bad misquote, and then the response from staff is to send a slideshow about a product from a particular supplier. Did you raise the question of allowing WGD to talk to Sprung then?
I cannot confirm that either way.
We turn to paragraph 45 of this document, summary document 2-4. We see that WGD sends a revised report to you at 4:23 p.m. on August 17th, and you pass that information on to Mr. Houghton, Ms. Leonard, and Ms. Amos shortly thereafter at about 5 o'clock p.m., writing, please find attached a revised package with the information compiled into one report. I believe the only piece we are now awaiting is the estimated operating costs. We'll forward that as soon as I receive. This report contains information about comparing a pre-engineered structure to an architectural membrane structure. So we're going to go take a look at this report now. It's at TOC 201266. If we could scroll down to page 9. Here under the heading pre-engineered structure versus membrane structure comparison, we see that there's further information provided. It discusses energy use and thermal performance. It discusses enclosure durability. And if you scroll down a little bit further, it discusses mechanical and electrical systems and constructability. So more information than was in the preliminary report. If we could scroll back up to the top of page 9, sorry. Under the heading Energy Use and Thermal Performance, section now says it's got the information we saw before about the normal insulation value for a pre-engineered structure, and notes that greater R values can be achieved with insulated panels and roofs by increasing the thickness and providing more insulation. Values as high as R30 are achievable. And it goes on to say that membrane structures by their nature have no inherent thermal resistant R value. However, by creating a cavity, higher R values can be obtained. With a 6-inch cavity in thermoplastic or similar insulation, R30 is achievable. And then it goes on to give a view about the performance of each of those two options. And if you look, starting from the second last sentence of the second paragraph, it says, while the avoidance of thermal breaks is not possible with a membrane structure, it goes on to explain why. For this reason, the performance of a pre-engineered structure with an equivalent amount of insulation to that of a membrane structure would be expected to be superior. Do you remember reading this conclusion when you received the WGD report?
Yes, I recall that.
Do you remember if there were any discussions among staff, including the EMC, about whether there were any concerns about that conclusion?
I can't recall any that I was involved in.
If we could scroll down to the next section with the heading Enclosure Durability. The first paragraph addresses insulated metal panels typical for a pre-engineered building system. It talks about the fact that they come with a variety of finishes and coating systems. It talks about the coating systems themselves, and it goes on to say, still, even as coatings have improved, it is expected that at some point repainting may be required. The expected lifespan of panel coatings is dependent upon the environment, but warranted for 20 to 40 years. On a pre-engineered structure, typically the roofing is TPO or PVC and is warranted for 20 years. The next paragraph addresses membrane structures, and it concludes, as the main part of the enclosure is a membrane, it is expected that its life expectancy before replacement would be in the range of 20 years, as with PVC roofing. And it notes that the product often comes with prorated guarantees for approximately that time. Do you remember discussing WGD's conclusions about the durability of each of these building types when this report was received or afterwards?
I recall reading it and understanding what they were indicating and perhaps discussing it with Dave McNulty, but not with anybody else.
Stepping back from the specific conclusions that we've reviewed in this report, do you remember any discussions about whether there were concerns with the accuracy of the conclusions that WGD reached in this report?
I recall Dave McNulty indicating there may be questions about the information in this report.
And I'm going to be a little bit more specific in what I ask you, because we've seen from the documents that after council votes to proceed with sprung structures for the arena and pool, a copy of the WGD report is circulated, and Mr. McNulty drafts a memo that addresses that report. Before council voted on August 27th, do you remember any discussion about any concerns or questions that arose from the WGD report?
I can't recall what was discussed.
To your memory, did anyone on staff go back to WGD with questions about its report or further questions before the August 27th council meeting?
I can't recall anything other than the R30 discussion.
And what was the R30 discussion, the discussion that led to Mr. McNulty sending the sprung PowerPoint to WGD on August 17th?
Correct.
Do you remember any discussion about whether the WGD report ought to be shared with council as a standalone document or appended to the staff report?
I vaguely recall a discussion, but I cannot recall the conclusion.
We could scroll down to page 10 in this document. Keep going to the heading project costs. Here, WGD has set out a table with its estimates. Its estimated site costs common to building types to be $1,164,281. And then at the bottom, it's set out building costs, pre-eng building option A, and the estimate is $7,632,124.29, and building costs for fabric structure option B, $7,132,124.29. Do you remember seeing these estimates when you reviewed this report?
I recall seeing this report. I can't recall the specific numbers I saw, but I'm assuming they haven't changed in this report.
To your knowledge, did anyone on staff go back to WGD at any point with questions about these numbers at all?
Not that I can recall.
We could turn to paragraph 333 of the staff report. Of the foundation document. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm turning to ask you some questions about the drafting of the staff report now. This paragraph describes Ms. Leonard sending a draft of the staff report to the EMC, yourself, and Mr. McNulty on August 18th, 2012. Her email indicates that it's the first attempt at the report and that there are several items, particularly cost estimates, pros, cons, and other considerations that most definitely need fleshing out since we don't have all of them yet. If we can scroll down further, she indicates that she wants to break the operating costs out into fixed and variable. She discusses how she envisions the recommendations section. It's going to contain various options. She lists some of them: do nothing but establish a reserve for future construction, do nothing but the Eddie Bush Memorial Arena, do nothing but the Eddie Bush Memorial Arena and establish a reserve for future construction, do nothing at Central Park, do Centennial Pool and Eddie Bush Memorial Arena, etc. She says there's a significant number of permutations on these recommendations that should be discussed with council or some members of council before the 27th. Do you remember receiving this email?
It looks familiar to me.
Do you remember having any discussions about the draft staff report or the items that Ms. Leonard's identified in her emails here at this point in time around August 18th?
I recall having a lot of conversations, but I cannot recall the specific detail of any of them.
I'm happy to turn up the document if you'd like to look at it. I can tell you that it envisions a potential RFP process for each of the arena and the pool if council chooses to proceed. Do you remember any discussions about procurement options for the town in respect of buildings for the pool or the arena at this point in time?
At no time did we discuss a procurement method, but I was under the assumption there would be some sort of procurement process.
And when you say some kind of procurement process, does that include a sole source procurement, or are you talking about something else?
No, I envisioned a tender process.
Understand that you were on vacation from August 22nd to August 24th. We haven't seen any emails providing you with drafts of the staff report during that period of time. Do you recall if you received drafts of the staff report while you were on vacation during the week of August 22nd?
I know I heard the content of the report. I'm not sure how I got it, whether somebody read it to me or somehow I received a copy. I can't recall, but it is what I had a follow-up conversations on about my concerns with some of the report.
When you say that you don't know if someone read it to you, are you somebody reading it to you over the phone?
Correct.
Do you have any recollection that suggests to you that somebody might have read it to you over the phone?
I've tried to remember this and I cannot remember this piece.
Speaking more generally, what was your understanding when you went on vacation on August 22nd about what your involvement would be in the staff report? It's not finalized when you leave. What did you think you would be doing with respect to it while you were gone?
From what I can recall, I felt that I would confirm that WGD provided us with the information we expected out of their contract and that it was accurately reflected in the report.
You've already told us a bit about the telephone conversation that you recall having with Mr. Houghton. understand that you can't recall precisely when that took place or how you had information about the contents of the staff report when you spoke to him. Do you remember what the version of the staff report that you discussed with him said about the procurement that was envisioned for council going forward, or for the town going forward?
Unfortunately, I cannot recall.
Do you remember if you compared the information about the work that WGD did that was in the report to the report that WGD provided to staff?
No, I don't believe I had the ability to do that.
You told us earlier when you were describing the conversation that you had with Mr. Houghton that he was suggesting to you that you weren't a team player, or he was asking you to be a team player. Am I describing that conversation accurately, for starters?
Yes.
During that conversation, or at any other time before council voted to proceed with Sprung, did Mr. Houghton ever suggest to you that he was concerned about your ability to be objective about the new direction because of the work you'd done with the Central Park Steering Committee or otherwise?
He may have, but I can't recall specifically.
Do you recall anybody raising that kind of concern with you before council voted to proceed with Sprung on August 27th?
They may have, but I can't recall specifically.
Is there any reason that you think that they may have?
No.
We turn to paragraph 338 of the foundation document, please. This paragraph describes that Mr. Houghton sent Ms. Leonard's draft of the staff report to Deputy Mayor Rick Lloyd on August 19th, writing to him, "Take a look at this. I've not read it yet, but I'm going to ask Marjorie to flip it to you as well." Were you aware that the Deputy Mayor was reviewing a draft of the staff report at this point in time?
No, I was not.
Did you become aware at any point after the fact that he had been given the opportunity to review the draft of the staff report?
Not that I can recall.
In your experience, was it normal or usual practice to share drafts of a staff report like this with certain members of council, not council as a whole?
No. This is exactly the type of process that I would find changed and I would ask questions about. We should be sharing information, the same information with all of council.
We turn up paragraph 447 of the foundation document. This paragraph describes an email exchange that you had with Mr. Houghton on August 25th after the draft staff report was finalized. You write to him, "I was wondering if you and or someone from the executive management team would have some time to review the arena and pool report on Monday's agenda. I reviewed the information, was hoping to clarify some of the numbers, so I'm prepared to respond to any questions." And if you look at paragraph 448, Mr. Houghton responds that you could call him the following day. First of all, does this help you place in time the conversation that you had with Mr. Houghton that you've described to us, in which he was asking you why you couldn't be a team player with respect to the staff report?
This suggests to me exactly the conversation I've referenced before.
Okay. It appears to us that the report is finalized and circulated as part of the agenda on August 24th. You email him on August 25th. You're going to speak to him on the 26th. council meets on the 27th. Do you remember which numbers you wanted to clarify with him that were set out in the staff report?
I can't recall specifically, but what I believe I recall is that it didn't have the breadth or scope of information I had thought we would present, and therefore I was concerned, and that's what I needed to clarify. But the order of things at that time is unclear to me.
I'm going to take you to a copy of the final staff report now. I have some questions about that document for you. It's at CJI 6146. I asked you a question along these lines before, but just for the sake of completeness, at any point before this report was presented to council at the August 27th, 2012 council meeting, did you compare its contents to the report that WGD provided to staff?
I cannot recall.
If we could go to page 6 of this report. Let's scroll down a little bit to the heading Department Head Review. Here it indicates that this report was reviewed by the Executive Management Committee, Director of Parks, Recreation and Culture, and Manager of Fleet Facilities Purchasing, August 21. Do you have any recollection of reviewing a version of this report on August 21st?
I cannot confirm that I reviewed it on August 21st.
And if you can scroll down to page 7. Below the signature line. It indicates that it was submitted by the Executive Management Committee with input from yourself, Mr. McNulty, and Mr. Seymour. I don't see anything in the staff report that indicates that you refused to sign off on it. Do you recall if you ever advised anyone other than Mr. Houghton that you were refusing to sign off on this report?
No, the only person I had the conversation with was Mr. Houghton, and I agreed to have my name that I had reviewed it and had input on it, I guess is the wording here.
Why didn't you ever advise anybody else on staff or council that you wouldn't sign off on the contents of this report?
Probably because the person I reported to was the CAO.
Can you remember any other reason why you didn't advise anybody else that you wouldn't sign off on this report?
I can't say I didn't tell other people that I wouldn't sign off. I just can't recall if I did and who those people would be.
If we could turn back to
I take it the logical person for you to express that kind of a concern to would be the person to whom you reported. Would that be correct?
That would be correct.
And you did that.
That would
That's
have
what
been
prompted
Mr. Houghton.
the discussion.
That's
yes.
correct.
What was there's a communication back and forth that's reflected in the fact that these draft reports are circulated to individual council members and so on. I can see that in the documents. Was it ever the experience that council members lobbied the staff over their position? Did council members ever talk to the staff about the position that would be taken in these staff reports?
In my experience, that does happen, but good governance practice would suggest that they don't influence it, and that would be where a CAO would work with the mayor, because the mayor is the one that is responsible for council to avoid those circumstances. But things changed here, and that happened quite a bit.
Did that happen with respect to this report or the reports concerning the membrane and the pool?
As far as messages that I heard and from reading the documents I've seen since, I believe it did.
One more question about your conversation with Mr. Houghton about your refusal to sign off on the staff report before I ask you some further detailed questions about it. What was your reaction to being told by the person you reported to? Or what was your reaction to not having your concerns addressed by him? You explained to him that you think things are missing. He asks you why you can't be a team player. What was your response to that?
Well, first of all, his behavior in that conversation was extremely aggressive. There was yelling, which I'm not used to from a person in his position. I tried to indicate that it's not that I'm not trying to be a team player. I'm trying to do what I believe is my job as a department head, to collect accurate information to the best of my ability and to present that to all of council, and I'm concerned the report does not reflect that.
How did that conversation end?
Abruptly.
Do you remember who ended the conversation?
No.
That conversation have any effect on how you approached your job after the conversation?
The whole experience had an effect on how I approached my job. Yes, it did.
How did it affect the approach you took to the work you were doing?
I was not new to the public service, and I chose this career path because I'm very committed to local government, good governance, and building strong, healthy communities. And community service is a commitment I made very seriously. So I was not going to run away from this circumstance, but I need, like everybody, to adjust and evolve in their circumstance and do the best that you can. And I recall working very closely with my team of staff, trying to teach them through this process how we have to adjust, but not give in to what we believe to be true and right. So I came to the table asking questions and tried to be respectful and professional, but always framing an alternate perspective that I believe to be important to consider without imposing, saying that I know it all. That was very difficult, and it went on for months, and I had to do a lot of soul searching about what type of environment I want to be part of, and do I continue?
I'm going to turn from those questions back to the staff report. If we could scroll up to page 2.
Actually, just before we do that, you knew what had happened to Ms. Wingrove.
Yes.
A person could reason that it stands to reason that from time to time people will get dismissed for whatever, because they should be, let's say. Is there a way that can happen that doesn't result in people becoming concerned, that they could be next? Is there a way of doing that allows, that doesn't have that kind of an effect on on the people who are left behind. Because it seems to me there's not a lot of difference between a heated conversation in which you're told you're not a team player and your dismissal. So either you don't dismiss anybody, or if you do dismiss anybody, what I'm asking about is have you any thoughts on whether there's a way of doing that which kind of preserves the independence of the people who are committed to public service?
I believe, and I say this with...
I'm asking you what you...
Yeah,
I am asking you.
with humble respect, that is what I tried to do. To have integrity, to be true to the calling that I came to, and be true to the residents of Collingwood by framing the right information and the right considerations. I understood that I was walking a fine line, and if people didn't like that, a lot of people were worried about their jobs around me and felt they needed to comply. I was worried I might lose my job. That was definitely a consideration, but I believed that I had to stay true to myself and what I believed was the right thing for this community, and was willing to take that risk.
Turning back to the contents of the staff report, if we could scroll up to page 2 and look under the heading, enclose the outdoor pool with a fabric building. I think you'll have to scroll down a little bit to get to. This section starts with the statement, in researching a year-round enclosure for the existing outdoor pool, what research are you aware that staff did about enclosing the existing outdoor pool?
I believe the only research was on the sprung structure through sprung.
You could scroll down to the last paragraph on this page, and it spills over to the following page. It says, we are aware of one supplier of the type of insulated architectural membrane structure that would allow for satisfactory year-round swimming pool use. And then it goes on to say, in future, it would be possible to relocate or repurpose the insulated architectural membrane structure at another location, adapt it to another use, or otherwise recommission it to a new owner within this expanding market. Are you aware of any information that staff had about the practicality of relocating, repurposing, or selling the fabric membrane structure being proposed here to put up around the pool?
Once again, I don't believe there was any independent research done on this topic. It was information that was presented to certain staff through the supplier.
If you could go to page 4 of this document. Scroll down a little bit more. Paragraph that said, the estimated cost for the supply and construction of the basic insulated architectural membrane arena is $7,392,000, as compared to $11.1 million to $12.3 million brackets estimates provided by WGD for the pre-engineered steel arena built using conventional construction. When we looked at the WGD report, the estimate for the pre-engineered steel building was $7.632,124.29 million. I'm going to ask that that report be turned up for a moment. It's at TOC 201266. And if we could scroll down, keep going. Stop for a second. I'm going to ask you a couple questions about this to help with our comparison. In the introduction section, this says the design of the new arena will respond to climatic and environmental conditions. Goes on to talk about the use of sustainable products. And it ends with, the new arena is proposed to be designed to LEED Silver certification levels. Do you remember anyone at the town providing instruction to WGD that they wanted the estimates to include an arena designed to LEED Silver certification levels?
I can't recall that specifically.
If we scroll down from here, there's a list of green initiatives set out and then costs provided for each of the options. I'll just ask you to keep scrolling. So we've gone through and added them all up, and they add out to $1.15 million. You could keep scrolling down so we can see the base estimate. Go on. There you see site costs at 1.164, pre-eng building option A, 7,632,124.29, and then there's the possibility of an additional 1.15 million. The staff report sends out a range of 11.1 to 12.3 million. Do you know how staff got from WGD's estimates to those numbers?
No, I cannot recall.
Do you know if the estimates that are set out in the staff report were provided to WGD for WGD's review and comment on their accuracy or otherwise?
No, I do not.
Could we go back to the staff report at CJI 6146? We go back to page 4, please. We just looked at this, and this is where, at the beginning of the paragraph, it sets out the estimates for the insulated architectural membrane and the estimates for the pre-engineered steel building. About halfway through the paragraph, it says, the interior space that is provided within the architectural membrane structure allows for the cost-efficient addition of a second-floor lounge area with a view of the ice surface. The cost of the second-floor improvements within the architectural membrane arena is included in the above estimate, whereas a similar addition to the pre-engineered steel arena would add up to $1 million to the investment. I think you've already answered this question, but to your knowledge, was WGD asked to provide an estimate for the addition of a second floor mezzanine to the arena?
I do not know.
Do you have an understanding of whether this additional $1 million for the second floor is included in the 11.1 to 12.3 estimate, or if it would be on top of those numbers, like an additional cost?
I have had no opportunity to recently review and examine these numbers, so I'm not sure. And quite frankly, I can't even recall where they came from back then.
Well, that was going to be my question. I mean, who do you know who would have prepared part of it?
No, I do not.
Could we go to page 6 of this report?
I mean, you can see why I'm asking. There's a almost $4 million difference between what what we're told pre-engineered building is going to look like and what the architects say it's going to cost. The numbers, if you use the correct numbers, the price is about the same. Who I appreciate that you weren't a team player and that there's some exclusion going on here, but who would be able to draft this? Apart altogether from the fact that I appreciate you wouldn't know as much about the contents as one might have normally expected, but who's draft? How does that happen?
I would sincerely like to answer your question. There was so many hands in the pot and things changing that didn't follow proper protocol or procedure, and I really have tried to recall the details of it, but they're very vague to me. It was a long time ago, and I've been in other jobs handling large projects since that time, and it's very difficult for me to go back to that place where there was no standard protocol or process that I was familiar with.
Turning to page 6, which is on the screen in front of you, if you looked at the heading, element of competition was included in the gathering of estimates. Here it says the manufacturers of the architectural membrane structure knew they were in competition with the more traditional forms of construction. Do you know anything about what's described here? Are you aware of anything that staff or anyone from the town said to the manufacturers of the architectural membrane structure about them being in competition?
I have no idea what was said to the architectural membrane company, but I know I never told WGD that they were in competition.
That was going to be my next question. Based on, it appears that the instructions that you provided to WGD were cost out both a fabric building and a pre-engineered steel building and provide us with information that compares them. Do you understand how that could have changed into a situation in which WGD believed they were in competition with an architectural membrane structure?
No, I don't understand that. In fact, WGD contacted me very upset about this.
And that correspondence, I think, is reproduced in the foundation document. Under the heading cost effectiveness and benefit to the town, it says, through the investigative process, it has been determined that the architectural membrane structure would provide the most cost-effective and all-inclusive solution for the town's needs. We've seen the estimates that are set out in the staff report, and we've talked about those. Do you know what all-inclusive solution is referring to here?
No, I do not.
Were you part of any discussions with staff about which of the two options was more inclusive of factors that were important to the town as far as the arena went?
I believe I was. I articulated that we have not taken this to the community. All our consultation was based on a multi-purpose community center that had benefits beyond the features on their own. And that was one of my concerns because that's what the community valued, not to mention some of the operating efficiencies and the energy efficiencies that are created in that type of environment versus standalone facilities.
Looking at the italicized heading sole source, it says, through staff research, it has been determined that there is only one supplier that can meet the specifications staff developed for the facilities. Do you know what staff research is being referred to here?
No, I do not.
You know if WGD Architects was ever asked to determine whether there were any other suppliers that could meet specifications that staff developed for the facilities. I mean, we see the report where they provide estimates for a fabric building and a pre-engineered steel building, but do you know if a question like this was ever put to them?
Could you repeat the question part, please?
I guess what I'm trying to figure out and doing a very bad job explaining is the staff report references staff research that concludes that there's only one supplier that can meet the specifications staff developed for the facilities. Do you know if that conclusion was ever put to the independent architectural consultants the town retained, WGD, for comment or confirmation?
I don't believe it was.
If you go up to the top of the page, I just want to take a look at the recommendations for a second. Top of the report, I should say. The recommendations are that council directs staff to proceed with the purchase and construction of an insulated architectural membrane facility for a year-round single pad arena and similar language for a structure of the existing pool. At the time that these recommendations were made to council at the August 27th, 2012 meeting, did you have an understanding of who the town would be purchasing the membrane from?
No, I don't.
Did you have an understanding of who would be constructing the architectural membrane facilities?
No, I believe I did not.
There's a slide presentation that was made to council at the August 27th council meeting. We can see that it's circulated to you. You provide some commentary on staffing numbers. I want to ask you about a different aspect of that presentation, though. It's found at TOC 206027. Can we go to slide 23 of this document? This is a slide that addresses the construction of a single pad arena that can be phased into a double pad. And if you scroll down, I just want to take a look at the bullet point that says either building can be LEED Silver certified. However, the architectural membrane building has the LEED requirements already built in. Do you remember what you thought that statement meant at the time?
No, I don't.
We know that council voted on August 27th to proceed with the recommendations that staff made to purchase and construct sprung facilities for the arena and the pool. At that time, some information had been provided to council about options for how to pay for these two facilities, but a decision had not yet been made about how the purchase and construction would be funded. Earlier in the day, we talked about a vote that council had passed to strike a phase 2 steering committee to look into funding options and guide the development of a funding strategy. We can see that a call-up for volunteers had been released back in the spring/early summer, and the town had received applications, but the committee was never struck. Do you know why that committee was never struck?
I can't recall exactly, but I believe that's when all the background competing interests started being raised, and I believe somebody from the EMC suggested I not proceed till we have further clarity.
We see some discussion about that at the July 16th meeting. And it appears to have been put on hold, but ultimately the committee is not struck at any point in time. Do you know why the committee was never struck?
From what I recall, all these other options came forward first and overshadowed that.
Who suggested that you not do that?
I cannot recall a specific person. Most of my discussions were with representatives of the EMC.
We can see that there's some discussion about that takes place at the July 16th meeting. It's said it in the transcript and earlier in the foundation document. I don't want to revisit that so much because I'm not asking why it was put on hold. It's more now the town or council has voted to construct these two facilities. We know they have to be paid for. Council had voted to strike a committee to investigate funding. The committee is ultimately not struck. After the council vote, Councillor Keith Hall posed some questions, and one of them was about why that Phase 2 steering committee was not struck. If we turn to paragraph 654 in the foundation document, and look at the first bullet point, it says, in response to a question about why council did not form a second committee to pursue all funding and fundraising options, the answer that was provided was there are no funding opportunities at this time. Do you remember if you were involved in drafting or reviewing that answer?
No, I cannot recall.
Does that answer to that question make sense to you?
It may have been partially true, but it doesn't feel comprehensive.
At any point prior to council's decision on August 27th to proceed with the sprung structures, did you become aware that Abby Steck, Paul Bonwick, or Greenleaf was involved in discussions about sprung BLT options available to the town for recreation facilities?
Can you repeat the first part about the time?
Before council voted to proceed with the two structures on August 27th.
No, I had no idea.
After August 27th, did you become aware that Abby Steck, Paul Bonwick, or Greenleaf had been involved in discussions with representatives of the town about the town's recreation facilities for sprung?
Not till much later.
Do you remember how you became aware that they had been involved?
Through communication amongst colleagues of information that came out much later.
And when you say information that came out, are you referring to information that came out in the media or otherwise?
The media was definitely one source, and in reading the documents, I certainly learned way more than I ever knew.
I'm looking at the time. I think that I can be finished in the next 10 to 15 minutes, so I'm proposing that we do that before we take the afternoon break. Does that make sense to you? Okay. We go to paragraph 62 of summary document 2-4, please. This paragraph describes that Joe McDonald of the Parks, Recreation, and Culture Advisory Committee circulated an email to other members of that committee on October 5th, 2012. And to that email is attached a file named 2012-0820 Central Park New Arena Options. This This paragraph describes that the attachment was a version of WGD's Central Park New Arena options, and I'm going to ask that that be pulled up. It's TOC 225, I believe it was 728.
Must be a top secret document because
I am looking for the attachments that's referenced in that paragraph in summary document 2-4, paragraph 62. If we could scroll to page 9, this is all a very long exercise to say to you that we've reviewed this document, and it is the version that includes the information about an insulated fabric membrane. And if you scroll down to page 10, it sets out the estimates that we've looked at before that were contained in what appears to us to be the final report that WGD sent across. You recall learning that a version of this report, or this report, was being circulated amongst the Parks, Rec, and Culture Advisory Committee?
I don't specifically recall that. However, the PRCAC committee, the Parks, Recreation, Arts, and Culture Committee, was very interested in this venture, and so it doesn't surprise me that they would have access to information.
If we could go to paragraph 64 of summary document 2-4. Paragraph describes an email that Mr. Houghton sends to Mr. McNulty on October 5th. He sends him excerpts from the WGD report regarding energy use / thermal performance, enclosure durability, mechanical and electrical systems, and constructability. This is the information we saw earlier where WGD is comparing the pre-eng steel to the fabric building. In his email, Mr. Houghton wrote, "Dave, this is what WGD architects said when they compared a steel fabricated building to a sprung structure. Can you help with the errors in their comments? Once again, this is time sensitive." Were you aware that Mr. McNulty was being asked to go through this exercise at this time?
Not with any specifics.
Okay, what do you recall about?
Actually, I truthfully can't recall if I knew or didn't.
Could you pull up TOC 0600194? This is an October 8th email that Mr. Houghton sends to members of council, members of the EMC, yourself, Ron Martin, Dave McNulty, and Dennis Seymour. In it, he writes, on Friday afternoon, Councillor West sent me information that was being circulated by the Friends of Central Park. This information was a report produced at our request by WGD Architects comparing a steel fabricated building to the insulated architectural membrane building. The report is being misread mainly because the report originally was not comparing the proper structures and was revised partially by WGD. Town staff were aware of what was and was not revised, but without this knowledge, one can see how this could be misleading. The following is an excellent report from Dave McNulty fully explaining the report and how it is being misinterpreted and how it should be understood. I had asked you questions about whether you could recall any discussions or concerns raised by staff about the WGD report when staff received it. Do you remember this memo and information being circulated at this point in time after the WGD report was being looked at by members of the public?
Now that you've shown me this, I recall it, but I can't recall any detailed context for it.
Do you remember if you reviewed Mr. McNulty's memo at the time to see if you agreed with the conclusions that he came to?
No, I believe I did not.
One of the attachments to this document sets out WGD Architects develop project costs. I'm going to ask that that document be shown to you. And it's at TOC 600-196. And if you take a look at this, it sets out an estimate for the pre-engineered steel building, and scroll down, a list of recommended upgrades. It shows that contingencies included in the WGD budget were taken out, and then numbers for a second floor and mezzanine were included. 1.164 million for site, park, and development was included, bringing us to a subtotal of 10,165,475. And then 10% is added on top of that for design fees, permits, and miscellaneous. And then an additional 10% is added on top of that for a contingency, bringing the total to 12.3 million, just over 12.3 million. Do you remember reviewing this document at the time that Mr. Houghton circulated Mr. McNulty's memo?
I don't recall reviewing it prior to it being circulated.
Do you remember reviewing it when it was sent around to council, the UMC, and others on staff?
I'm sure I reviewed it, but I can't recall my reaction or follow up from this.
Do you have any understanding as to who made these adjustments or why they were made?
No, I don't at this time.
To your knowledge, was this information ever provided to WGD for their review or comment?
I have no knowledge of that.
Could we turn to paragraph 707 of the foundation document, please? I'm just bringing you here for a point in time and reference. In or about October 2012, the concept of a therapeutic pool is introduced to the council, and council ultimately votes to include the therapeutic pool in the Heritage Park pool project. Do you remember how the concept of a therapeutic pool came up?
I can't recall specifically, but there were numerous conversations with the shutdown of the therapeutic pool that existed in the design components of the Central Park Steering Committee, having a warm pool for younger swimmers. Perhaps even the Clippers may have raised it. So, but at this point, I can't recall specifically one source or the prominent source of where this came from.
Those are my questions.
Take 10 minutes.
Ms. Proctor, my name is Chenoweth, Fred Chenoweth, and I represent Mr. Ed Houghton. I have a few questions to clarify some of the answers you have given through the course of this proceeding. But before I get into that, am I correct in my understanding that you were a member of the Central Park Steering Committee that made the recommendation for the multi-use recreational facility?
I would correct that I was the staff liaison or the staff facilitator of that committee, but the committee had a membership that voted on things, that I was the staff facilitator of that.
All right. I take it you supported the eventual report that came out of the steering committee?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you. And you've indicated to us that would it be fair to say that as things developed, there appeared to be a bit of a struggle to some extent between the steering committee idea of a MRF and the alternatives that were later being reviewed by council, including a fabric roof? That was a bit of a competition between those two.
I'm not sure I could agree with that. From whose perspective are you asking the question?
I'm just asking if that's a reality, no particular perspective. I mean, my observation of these things, and maybe you're going to disagree with me, is that it became one of the aspects of this thing was a competition between the suggestion of the steering committee and the suggestion of alternate structures that was being brought up by some of the council members and others as we move towards August 27th.
From my perspective, because it's the only one that I can speak from clearly, there was no competition between the two. It was a matter of doing our due diligence to present council with all the information they needed to make an informed decision, and that would include industry expert factual information, but also input from the citizens on their preference.
You've already told us, I think, that at no time did anyone suggest to you that your involvement with the steering committee gave you any sort of conflict of any kind. In response to some of my friends' questions, you indicated that was never suggested to you by anyone.
I'm sorry, could you please repeat that question?
In answers to some of my friends' questions, you said that no one through the course of the period between the steering committee report and August, which was on March 5th, I think, 2012, the time of the vote by council on August 27th, I think you confirmed that no one had suggested to you that this created any sort of conflict for you, your being on the steering committee. Is that fair? No one made that suggestion to you?
Well, I don't see any conflict, and I was not technically on. I was facilitating the steering committee.
Right. So you don't feel that your involvement with the steering committee and your support of that report put you in any sort of odd position with respect to your ongoing research you were doing for the town with respect to alternatives?
No, I think I expected the same research from the steering committee that I would have expected from the alternate options.
Very good. You, I think, indicated in some of your preliminary comments that you joined the town of Collingwood in or about August of 2010. Is that correct?
I was hired prior to the summer of 2010. I came here for a short time Yes, somewhere around there, correct.
All right, well, that was the evidence you gave to
Yeah.
my friend. And there was a new council that was elected in October of 2010.
Correct.
So your opportunity to work with the council that existed at August 10, 2012, August of 2010, when you joined Collingwood, your opportunity to work with that existing council was limited.
Correct.
All right. So you wouldn't have had much of a chance to judge status of working with that council versus the status of working with the new council that was elected on October 10th.
That is correct.
Thank you. You spoke of the development of the Executive Management Committee after April of 2012 when Ms. Wingrove was terminated and Mr. Houghton was hired. And you would have known, I take it, having been with the town for a period of time at that point, in excess of a year, you would have known of the other obligations that Mr. Houghton had at the town, including his obligations with the power distribution company Colas and Colas Power Stream.
Correct.
You knew he had obligations with other obligations in the town in addition to his Colas obligations.
Public Works and Engineering, correct.
And I'm assuming that you understood that the necessity for an EMC, for an Executive Management Committee, was that very reality that the town had asked Mr. Houghton to become CAO and that he had other responsibilities, and there was a concern as to whether or not he could meet all of the obligations, including the new obligations, as CAO if he did not have the assistance of an EMC. You would have understood that.
I understood that that was his choice to manage the competing responsibilities and a way to assist him.
Very good. So I take it you would have thought that the creation of the EMC was an understandable thing to do at that time and for Mr. Houghton to request? Given his responsibilities that he had?
I can't speak to that. That's not my area of responsibility or scope.
Okay. But in any event, I had the impression that Mr. Houghton sat you down at one juncture and explained what the EMC was about and what it was attempting to accomplish.
Yes.
And you were content with that explanation? All right. And you made every effort to make your relationship with the EMC a successful one?
Absolutely.
Right. And it was a little different, no question, than the situation where there was simply, as was the case with Ken Wingrove, one single CAO, but this was a new arrangement, but under all the circumstances, a sensible arrangement, and one you were prepared to deal with.
One I was prepared to deal with.
Thank you. Now, I'd ask if we could turn up, if we could please, TOC 0155056, which I believe is a letter written by Kevin Lloyd.
But just a second. You said you thought it was written by,
Kevin Lloyd.
like this is from
maybe go down a little further then if we could.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
Thank you.
If we could allow the witness an opportunity to review the whole letter from Kevin Lloyd, if we could, please. Further down, just if you'd have a look at that witness and review it as we go.
Just a minute. Make sure that the witness had an opportunity to read before you start moving.
Thank you. I'm good right here for now. Thanks.
And the date of that email, as I understand it, was the 8th day of May. Can we just go back up to see the date of the email? Thank you. And again, bring the email up so the witness can have a look at it. And you would have an opportunity to review this email, I think you told us, in your evidence in chief?
I've reviewed a lot of the information, but I didn't retain all of it and didn't see all of it.
Right.
So I'm reading it right now.
All right, but you would have had a chance to see that.
I wonder if we just let the witness read it first and then ask the questions.
Certainly.
You could move up, please. Okay. Read this email.
Thank you. And this was an email you would have had occasion to see in or about May 8th of 2012 when it came out?
I believe so.
Thank you. And you would have been aware at that time that at least one of the councillors, in this case, Kevin Lloyd, is saying that I hate to be the one who rains on anyone's parade. However, we must be pragmatic. I believe the project will not fly at a price tag of $35 million today. We can get what the public wants now and complete the vision over time. So you would have been aware, at least as early as May, that there were some who were asking questions about the appropriateness of proceeding with the full MRF project at that time.
Correct.
Right? And again, who were expressing the view that the cost of that project was possibly beyond the reach of the town as of that period of time. And this is written in May of 2012.
Correct.
All right. And you also would have had occasion, I think you told us, to see the email of Councillor Rick Lloyd of June 14, and I think that's TOC 017221. Could we pull that up if we could, please? Yes, I can. I believe it's TOC 017221, I believe. All right, then I'm missing a 2. Let me try again. TOC 0172221. Thank you. And could you take an opportunity to read that email, which is June 14th, 2012.
Read the email. Sorry, I've read the email.
Thank you very much. So you indicate that, is it fair to say the email requests that Mr. Houghton obtain prices to build a sprung building over the Centennial Pool and to get one of their structures, i.e. sprung, to cover the outdoor rink? That appears to be the request of Councillor Lloyd, the Deputy Mayor, on or about the 14th of June,
Correct.
2012. So it's pretty clear that when you told us at earlier times that your first recollection of hearing anyone talk about the sprung buildings was in a conversation you had with Deputy Mayor Lloyd on July 12th. July 12th, at the opening of the new fire hall. That would be inaccurate in that it appears you would have known of the sprung request for pricing. You were copied on this email as early as June 14th, 2012.
You're correct.
Very good, thank you. And you would have known as a result of a review of that email that, as with Kevin Lloyd, the email we just reviewed moments ago in May, there was another councillor who obviously was wishing to look at alternatives and had concerns about moving forward with the project suggested by the steering committee.
Yes, I heard through emails. That is correct.
Very good. And were you hearing any general buzz around the council offices or anything of that nature at that time that suggested that there were people concerned about the costs and concerned about trying to bite off too much at that particular time?
Certainly,
Possibility of looking at alternatives. Did you hear any buzz to that effect around the town?
I can't. There were two questions there: around town or around the council offices.
Let's take them one at a time. Around council.
There weren't really council offices. Councillors didn't sit in office here, but clearly there were emails that started circulating. And
Yes.
again, as I stated before, my direction should come from council as a whole. And anytime there was direction from council as a whole, I would act on that.
Told us that. My point is that you would have understood from at least Kevin Lloyd's document and the document of June 14th that there were councillors who were beginning to look at other alternatives.
In my previous experience, councillors would give direction to staff to look at other alternatives.
I understand that that's your position. My question is different than that. Did you know, as a result of these two emails that we've looked at, that there was councillors who were beginning to consider alternatives to the steering committee report?
Yes.
Thank you very much. One further document, and again we'll look at paragraph 192, if we could, of the foundation document. Just before we do that, in response to Mr. Rick Lloyd's email, you did send a further email, and maybe we can pull it up at this time. It's TOC 0172248. And that's the top email. You would have sent an email on or about the 14th of June to Dennis Seymour and Darren Potts.
That is correct.
If I got it right, that Dennis Seymour is managing the pool and Darren Potts is managing the arena. Dennis Seymour is, and Darren Potts is managing the pool. Have I got that right?
No, Dennis
Okay.
Seymour is our manager of facilities,
Yes?
or was at that time, and
That
Darren,
include the arena?
that's correct.
You?
And Darren Potts looked after our bookings and
Your,
bookings, rental permits.
good, okay, thank you. In any event, I take it you sent this email to these two individuals as a course of action to follow once you saw the June 14th email of Rick Lloyd. Is that fair?
That's correct.
All right. And you were asked them to get some approximate pricing with respect to both of those concepts.
That's correct.
And you sent them the email from Mr. Lloyd.
Correct.
And is it fair to assume that as a result of your sending them that brief email, that one of the places they might go to find out approximate pricing would be to Sprung, the organization that was mentioned in the email of Mr. Lloyd?
It would be, yes.
So you wouldn't be surprised if they went off and asked a series of questions of Sprung?
Yes, they could have.
Thank you. Indeed, you also wrote another email, again dated June 14th, on that day to Ed Houghton, and that is email TOC 0172251, TOC 0172251. Could you pull that up, please?
Yes, I see the email.
All right, and you've had an opportunity to read it?
Yes, I
All right,
have.
thank you. No doubt that, again, in spite of your view that the email of Mr. Lloyd was inappropriate, your oft-expressed view that that you want a direction to come from council, you were assisting Mr. Houghton and telling him, in furtherance of the request that you got from Mr. Lloyd, or that you saw from Mr. Lloyd, that you had some previous work that had been done in this area.
You are correct. And as a point of clarification, if I could ask, I seem to recall now as I'm going through this that the fire hall opening preceded all this, not afterwards. So I don't have that recollection clearly, but I recall me discussing covering options before, but I could be wrong. So again, those dates are confused for me.
All right, well, maybe other things will tell us that, but my information is that the fire hall opening was July 12th.
Okay.
But in any event, we'll leave that to other times and weigh your evidence in light of that. But
Thank
no
you.
question that in spite of your view of Mr. Lloyd's approach to these matters, you proceeded to respond to his email. You got Seymour and others to make some inquiries about price, and you told Mr. Houghton that you had some information that may be of assistance in responding to Mr. Lloyd's request. Correct?
Correct.
Thank you. And one more note, looking at paragraphs 192 of the foundation document. Actually, it's 193. If you could pull that up. This appears to be a comment of the mayor in a news article. Sandra Cooper says whether to go forward with Central Park. Cooper said, "I think there will be other options that come forward. The task force has been notified and thanked for the work that they've been done." She goes on to say, "It's too much money," Cooper said. "I've said that all along. It's too much money." Did you become familiar with that news article and/or the views of the mayor, Sandra Cooper, on or about July 16th, when she's saying that it looks like it's too much money, the Smurf project?
I was aware of the article.
Yes. So we now seem to be having a rather substantial crew of councillors, as high up as the mayor, who are expressing some concerns about the appropriateness of proceeding at this time with the full $35 million MRF project suggested by the steering committee. Then you would have been aware of that.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Chenoweth, if you're moving on to another
I
point.
am, sir. Thank you.
It's 4 o'clock, and we've got to be out of here by 4 because the council meeting's tonight. So maybe this is a good place to stop.
Thank you, Your Honor. It is.
All right. Can we start tomorrow at 9? Does that work for everybody? Okay. So tomorrow at 9, and Ms. Proctor, don't discuss your evidence with anybody from now till tomorrow morning to avoid any confusion or suggestion that people are influencing your testimony.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Order will rise.